Thank you to our sponsors for supporting this episode of Troxel, Arc IT, BQE Core, and Avail. We'll share more about them later on in the episode. Welcome to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. This is the podcast where I have a conversation with guests from the architectural community and beyond to talk about the coevolution of architecture and technology. In this episode, I welcome Keith Huser. Keith is a third-generation builder turned owner representative and advocate. He's a principal at Peak Projects in Los Angeles, where it's their mission to provide exceptional owners representation and proactive project management services to today's most discerning leaders and innovators. In this episode, we discuss the topics of owner representation and advocacy, the importance of speaking the design, construction, and owners' languages, the highly sought-after position of being a trusted advisor, getting pushed out of one's comfort zone, finding joy in the process of a project and a career, the three types of project managers, and it's the first time on this podcast we really dive into the owner's perspective. I think that can be really valuable to the audience of AEC. So, without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Keith Huser. Keith, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Evan, thank you so much. It's really great to be here.
So, Keith, you are an owner's rep, and I want to weave this story together to figure out how you got to where you are. And in order to do that, you are, like I told you, the first person kind of on that side of the table on this podcast. And so you have the weight of the world on your shoulders now. Everybody's going to be intently listening. But I think it's a great perspective to have, because one of the things that, this show is about the coevolution of technology and architecture / the built environment. And as a means to the end, though, it's not why we do what we do. I think maybe for some people it is, but I think ultimately, big picture wise, and if we think about this as generalist for a moment, at least, we are here to serve the people who pay to do these projects. It is for them. And there's a lot of people involved in the process along the way. This stuff is built by hand and ultimately for people. So I think that you bring an important perspective to the table as an owner's rep, and probably a lot of insight. And I think, to me, that's something that this whole audience could use a dose of, because you are in the trenches seeing how owners react to communication styles, design process, construction process, decision-making, all of these things along the way. So before we get to that point, I wanted to kind of front load it with that to tell people why they need to stick around for this, because this is an important perspective. Tell us how you got to this point on your journey.
Well, to reiterate what you just said, it is all very important. And to recap, understanding how an owner communicates and receives information is immensely important. And I think on my path and my journey, I grew up on a construction site. My father was a custom home builder in Indiana, from Indianapolis, Indiana, Naptown, as they call it, and was working alongside my father and a number of my brothers, and really, came to find home and peace on a construction site. It's a very chaotic, messy, depending on the site, unorganized process. And my father, to his credit, was very, very organized, very detail oriented, and really grew up, in his shadow, working on these intricate projects. And, my brothers and I, we've self-performed a number of the trades. I came up as a finished carpenter, really, really learned from my dad, and a number of my uncles as well. Spent a summer as an apprentice in a cabinet shop in Beech Grove, Indiana with my Uncle Jim. And you know, to go even deeper on that, my grandfather was a builder and a machinist, and owned a machine shop on the south side of Indianapolis through the 60s and 70s and 80s. And, was a very, very successful entrepreneur and built a number of his own homes. So, it's really in my blood and in my DNA. That our last name is actually Huser, loosely translates in German to Hauser, which is provider of shelter. So,
That's awesome.
Yeah,
It's in your DNA. Yeah.
it's in my DNA.
Let's do a digression here. I think this is cool stuff because I've also grown up as a builder and a maker, but much more on the do-it-yourselfer side. And I and that comes from my father and my grandfather as well. Like my garage is full of tools. I try to find ways to justify my ownership of them all the time because most of the time they're like an automobile. They sit in the driveway, right? They sit in the garage waiting to be used. And man, there's some awesome stuff in there, and I'm looking for opportunities to use it. But growing up in a family of builders is not something that I've experienced and haven't really had that storytelling time on this show. So thinking about it from my perspective, right? I've got a garage full of tools, but when tools and making and carpentry is your business, what is that like?
Well, painstaking, but very, very rewarding. In Indiana, we had I guess it was a farm, if you will. And my father had a 10,000 square foot steel building, and it was full of any.
This is like my dream.
It was, any device to conceptually think of anything was there at our fingertips. And I remember some of my earliest memories working for my father and earning my allowance was cleaning out the metal lathe. And it was not a small woodworking lathe. It was, 3 or 4 ton piece of equipment where you could machine any type of spinning metal that you could surmise. And I remember getting down in there and cleaning out all the metal shavings with an old broken dustpan and cleaning everything. Kerosene was the smell that comes to mind, really, really just cleaning it. And I think back now, it was treacherous work, but it really, then I got the moments when I was done. I got to stand to the side with a face mask on and watch my father and my grandfather go to work and create something that, they were creating something that had never existed before.
Yeah. Raw materials to finished object. Like that's just an incredible process.
Yes. And I think the most joyous part of it was the presence that was there. The feeling that you get in creating a hat where there was no hat, right? That resonance in my father and my grandfather's work was just incredibly valuable. And I think, being the student, you have to do the drudgery and the cleaning of the metal shavings, etc. But then you're afforded these brilliant opportunities to learn and take in something that you can't be taught really in a school.
To soak it up, yeah.
And to have, a kind father and a kind grandfather to stop and pause in the middle of their work and explain to you what they're doing and why they're doing it. Those are the moments that were just invaluable as a young man, and coming into my youth. And my brothers and I had so many of our own ideas, and let's build this or let's do that. And it was just a really great place to grow up and to experiment with a built environment in a very nurturing environment with my grandfather and my father and my family members.
And it's such a valuable piece of the puzzle, the actual making, right? There is the design process, which is very separate from the making process. And there's so much encapsulated knowledge in the process of making that designers should, or I don't know, it would be advantageous to know about those things.
I think absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it translates. It's interesting because Now that I'm thinking about it, this element translates into the work that I do now. One of the largest frustrations with clients that I've experienced, and maybe you have as well, and some of the listeners have too, is a patron will say that they understand what's conceptually designed, and then it gets built,
They had no idea.
and they're like, "What is this? This is not what I signed off on." It's like, actually, you did. Actually, you have. And so, in the making part of the experience, you really begin to understand that even when you conceptualize something, creating it, it may turn out just a little bit different, better or worse sometimes. And so, taking that insight and sharing it with a patron or a client and saying, I want to narrow this gap. I want to make sure that you understand the concept is the concept, but the formal shape that this may take might be slightly different. Also, in narrowing that gap is finding the extra tools and techniques, mock-ups, drawings, real life renderings. Now we have 3D modeling, where you can get something so photorealistic for a client to look at. But it's really taking those experiences of creating something physically and then introducing it to someone who is really making such a substantial investment in what often is a work of art. The projects we get to work on are these one-offs that's never been done. So it's making sure that they understand this is what we think it's going to be like, and this is what we think it's going to be. But the process of actually creating it will also bring in intricacies that may be better, right? They may be different. And you have to be patient and understanding and trust that the collaborators, the craftsmen, the creators, the designers, the architects, the engineers are all doing their best to make it what we're all anticipating, and to really give them reign to use their genius in a present moment state. Because that's, again, going back to the creating with my family members, was like, it was a very present moment status. And ensuring our patrons are allowing the designers and the team to be in their present moment status to create is just immensely important.
To get into that flow state where that genius can happen, right? Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily happen, I don't want to say on a schedule. You know what I mean? Like, it's on some levels it has to happen on a schedule. But
everything's always schedule based,
but
right?
Free from distraction, free from these other outside influences that could have a negative effect, and enable that genius to happen when it needs to happen in the best way that it possibly can right then.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, I interrupted you. Your journey to owner's rep, but I think that's a worthy discussion. There was one point I was doing design build, and I was brought up as every problem my father and his father solved was with a table saw, basically. And so I really grew up heavy on the wood side of things. And then when I was doing design build, my partner was a steel guy. And so we, crossed the streams, and I taught him wood and he taught me steel. And it just opens up a whole new world when you learn a new vocabulary like that, and how you can solve problems with different materials in different ways and achieve different types of constraints that can be overcome with each one that are beneficial to each one independently. It's really interesting. And so to think about like your father's shop and the ability to have free reign with a lot of these tools, with working with different materials, steel and wood and all these things. And man, it's just, that to me is like the ultimate playground, to have a space where you can do that. Because that's the other constraint, is having the space to fabricate these things is a key element that a lot of people don't have. Like, you end up building something out in the driveway, which is not flat and level, and it's not, protected from the elements and all these things. And you kind of have to have that dedicated space to make those things as well.
Yes. And the time,
right.
I guess as you become older and an adult, and, your family grows, your responsibilities grow, you have, sometimes less time to do those. And I just always had the time to do it in that stage of my life. But, it was a great place to grow up, and went off to college, got a degree in English and Spanish at Butler University in my hometown. Didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated school, and worked for a small commercial construction company straight out of college, and had finished a couple historic renovations, and it was very rewarding. But I was 21. I had the world was my oyster, as they say, and I needed to prove myself that I was different than my family name. So I did quite a bit of swimming upstream.
You can't fight the DNA, Keith. Like this,
Well,
I'm doing a little foreboding here. Like this is just, I can tell this isn't going to end well.
no. Well, everything that you incur in your life and encounter is an opportunity
It's useful
for experience and
right.
to learn. Yeah.
Yep.
So I went into medical sales, of all things, and worked in medical sales for a number of years. And I'm not by nature a very outgoing person. And, my first go at sales was challenging. The very first job I had out of college, other than construction, was door to door, business to business sales. And it was 50 doors a day, knocking on doors. And that was even before medical sales. That was internet services. And it was very challenging, but it put me out of my comfort zone.
Challenging to convince people to get out of the yellow pages and onto the internet. Yeah.
Yes. But immensely useful now, right? Looking back, I can connect the dots and see the experiences from that, and apply it to what I'm doing now, because pushed me out of my comfort zone, helped me learn to communicate even better with individuals, and just meeting them from knocking on a door, and them affording me the opportunity to come into their office and spend 2 or 3 minutes of their time unsolicited, and talking to them about their phone and internet service. That led to medical sales, which led to software sales. And I was just, I kept coming back to construction projects on the weekends, and was making furniture, and, doing all sorts of anything I could kind of find to quench that thirst. And in my mid 20s, I was like, what am I doing? Why am I fighting the flow? Why am I fighting my family's good name, and, what is inherently inside of me? So I left the sales world and went back to construction, and, I took a number of jobs working as a floor installer, a cabinet apprentice, a framer, a window installer, and did it all around the Mountain West. Worked in Jackson Hole for a couple years, then worked in Park City for a builder there, and really just enjoyed it. But having the sales background, and, a kind of a thirst for more development and more understanding of why things were the way that they were, instead of just doing it, I kept searching for a little bit more, and had reconnected with now my wife, who I had met previously in California. She was in LA, and, works in the entertainment industry, and said, "Well, if you want to be with me, we got to do it in LA." So I moved to LA, and we got married, and a year later, she was pregnant. We wanted to bring a child into the world, and I thought, okay, I have to get a big boy job now. I was doing kitchen and bathroom remodels for friends, and it was word of mouth, and it was referral based, and it was good work, and I enjoyed it. But I was at a point in my life where I thought I need to do something bigger for my legacy. Then I cold called. I took my selling skills from my phone and internet sales days, and I started cold calling job sites in Beverly Hills. I came across a gentleman by the name of Chester, and Chester was an older gentleman, had been working in construction for clearly all of his adult life, and he said, well, come back here. It was on Rodeo Drive, and he said, come back here, and let me sit you down and let me tell you how it is, right? And he's like, you're a nice young man, and you seem really happy. You don't want to do this.
He
this
was
is this is a thankless job. This is a hard job. You don't want to do this. He did everything he could to talk me out of it. And, I said, well, I appreciate your candor with me, but I do want to do this. And I'm about to have a baby, and this is a very big step in my life. So, is there any opportunity with your firm? And he gave me the phone number for the owner, and I called him, and we set up an interview, a couple weeks later, and we had an interview, and I sat down with Dan McGee, who was very much a mentor figure for me for the last half a dozen years of my life, and really grounded me and pushed me. And we interviewed, and he said, what are you looking for out of this opportunity? And I said, well, I want your job. And this is Dan. Dan is a very successful builder in, West LA, and probably has $1 billion worth of custom residential estates in his, portfolio. So I'm sure he kind of looked at me and thought, who the hell do you think you are, you young punk? You want my job. You can do my job. And, but he gave me a shot. He gave me a shot, and he put me on a project with his younger brother. And Terry and I worked for a very challenging, very wealthy client who played a bit of cat and mouse with me. His game was always to see what I could commit to, and then what I could deliver, and what the delta was. And he had us working on a 35,000 square foot estate in Holmby Hills, and it was gorgeous. And there was virtually nothing that needed to be changed about this house. It was a jewel box, but he wanted to leave his mark on it, and he wanted to use his time and money to make changes to it. And far be it for me to tell him that he shouldn't. And he put me through a year of just the most grueling construction sprints I've ever encountered in my life. How much money can you spend a month? How many people can you have on site? But I was fortunate for the opportunity. And he was a very challenging client, but we understood each other. And I was just very clear with him. I will do the very best I can with the time and money that you afford me. And I'll always be honest with you and tell you when I don't think it's feasible or possible, but that I'll try. And his goal was always to push me out of my comfort zone. And my goal was always to give him a dose of reality, because I don't think he was getting much of it. And it was a great opportunity. And, in that year, was promoted, started as a superintendent, was promoted to a project manager, had actually been solicited by that client to come and work for them to manage their properties across, North America. And I was, a new father, and that was an immense opportunity for me, with a insurmountable amount of money put in front of me. And I just knew that I would be required to travel at a moment's notice, and wanted to watch my daughter, grow in the first couple years of her life, and that I would never be able to get that time back. So I turned him down. I turned the client down. And at the same time, JD Group was going through a transition. The previous vice president had left, moved back to Florida to be with his family. And in that transition, Dan called me, and I told him, hey, I just got a really big job offer to do this. I don't, it's honestly too early for me to decide. My head was spinning. It was something that I was not anticipating. And he said, well, I wanted to throw an offer by you, or throw something by you. Our previous vice president has since left. Would you be interested in stepping into those shoes? Because he remembered our initial interview. You said that you wanted to do my job. This is the next step. Here you go. Here's your opportunity. So I slept on it. I talked to my wife about it, and we both agreed that sticking with that was a better path for me. And so I did it. And I spent almost 5 years in that seat, driving new business, acting as a project executive for JD Group, building out the business, bringing in, technology, project management platform, taking what the previous vice president did and trying to build an add-on to it, and really taking a legacy company and making it more new age.
Modernizing it. Yeah.
Exactly. Taking what I had seen that was already there and just trying to leave my mark as best I could and make it better. And Dan and I had talked, round and round about me being the minority owner by the time I was 40, and by the time I was 45 being the majority owner. And we always it was like a game of chicken, I think, with him. And I think to his credit, he's just such a good leader and a good builder. I don't know if he's ever going to be ready to completely let go
Step
until
away.
he
Yeah.
has to.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't discount him for that. I really respect it, actually. But in that process, I think it was, heavy pandemic, and a recruiter had reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've got an owner's rep firm out of San Francisco that's looking for a project manager." I said, "Huh, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that role. I hadn't considered that role for myself." And I said, "Yeah, no, thanks. I'm good, actually. I'm on my path. I got my blinders on right now. I'm the vice president of a very, successful custom home construction company, and I'm working on my succession plan, and really appreciate you reaching out, but I'm very happy." And he was diligent and good and circled back a couple times, and finally, in talking with my wife, she encouraged me. She's like, "Well, you should remain open. You should have the conversation. You just don't know what it could lead to." So I said, "You know what? Let's have a call. Let's talk as an owner's rep would to a builder. We can maybe meet each other. Instead of it being a job interview, it's just an interview to work together, to be a builder and an owner's rep." And they set up a call, and I met Grant Bowen, my business partner now, and we just had a conversation as old friends would have a conversation about the industry that we're working in, and what projects looked like, and what was fun about the projects we worked on. And, Grant is a fellow Midwesterner. He's from Michigan. So we just kind of hit it off. And I told him in the first call, I was like, "Well, look, I took this call just to meet you. This is kind of difficult for me now because now I'm really interested. I'm not interested in being a project manager because I just think, that I'll get really bored. But if you can do something bigger, you can come back to the table and entice me and position, something in front of me that meets my thirst and, quenches my thirst, then let's keep the conversation open. I'm just going to remain open here." We spent the better part of a year kind of just volleying back and forth, talking, you know, him asking for advice here or there. "What do you think about this? We've got this project there." Really just very friendly, open conversation.
That's just a great thing to pause on for a moment, is just this ability to not have to make a decision about that right away, and not being forced into something when you haven't had that dating period. Right. And so that's kind of what I'm drawing the analogy to with this back and forth for a year, right? Is kind of like, let's do a series of dates, and let's get to know each other and have these conversations and talk about the dreams and talk. And over that period of time, things come out, right? Like it just naturally goes one way or the other. And it sounds like it went positively, but it's such a crucial kind of gestational period for a new relationship, especially when you're thinking about doing something completely, well, maybe not completely differently, but differently than you've ever done before. And even opening the other party up to new opportunities. Like you said, like you didn't just want to take the one job, the PM that he was offering, but it's like, no, I want to do something different. I want to do something bigger. And then that gets their gears turning, right? And this back and forth really becomes a process of ideation and brainstorming and what if potential.
All the while we're negotiating with each other, right? And I said, "Look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm really interested in this." And I think, in the early conversations with him, I began to realize that a lot of my skill set and my true natural given talents were more akin to the owner's rep role than the builder. And in chatting with him and talking, I said, well, I'm so interested in this. Here's what I'm going to do as as my investment in peak projects. Before I'm even invested in peak projects, I'm going to hire an attorney and I'm going to pay for my attorney to do this negotiation to create what will become the framework for peak projects, moving forward to grow and expand. So it was like, look, this is a great company. Peak Projects has been around for 7 years, but we're just growing. We're no longer the sophomore or the freshman or really the junior. Grant had been in the private family office world doing what we do now, but was just for two families. And, I think when those families slowed down and stopped acquiring and stopped purchasing and expanding, I honestly, Grant may not mention or admit to this, but I think he got bored. And he's like, I want to start doing more of this and keep expanding and keep growing. And so he started Peak Projects, 8 years ago now. And, I just said, look, with my experience, I want to bring all of the gifts that I have to the table in concert with you, not just my understanding of the built environment and how to navigate relationships and projects, but how we can make this organization something bigger than both of us. And he was very receptive and always open to that. Grant is just a true collaborator. And so it was a great experience. And finally, we came to an agreement on paper and I said, okay, let's go skiing. Because, a lot of this speed dating or not even speed dating was over the phone call or text or Zoom. And we hadn't met in person. So we went skiing together for a weekend and it was great. It was really great. And even in that experience, we were like, we should do an offsite every year with all of our employees and take them skiing and do team building and make an ethos in a company and a feeling in an organization that, yes, we're here and we're working and the projects are difficult and the clients sometimes are difficult and, the hours can be difficult. But if we know one another in an organization that is spread out, but we get a chance to become friends with the other people we're working with, it will create something again that's bigger than us. And we had our first offsite this past year, and it was great. It was really great. So I joined up with Peak. I pulled over a few clients that I was working as a project executive with JD Group. The clients retained me and said, "Well, you can't go anywhere. You have to finish our project." So I was grateful for that, and then have picked up a few other clients with Grant, and it's a great organization. There's 18 team members now. We've got 45 projects across North America. I think we're managing close to $500 million worth of work. We're just really fortunate. So that's where we are today, Evan.
There we are.
I know it was
we got there.
A roundabout way of getting there.
The long digressions are encouraged, as we say. Let's take a quick break to share more about our sponsors. Arc IT. One of the things I really got out of the conversation that I had with Boris, the CEO of Arc IT, was that they are dedicated to the design community. They have 3 guiding principles listed on the front page of their website, and I wanted to dig in for a moment into those. The first one is that they are committed to being the expert. You've hired them to understand their business and to make the best IT decisions for you. So when you work with Arc IT, you will only work with industry-experienced IT professionals. The second guiding principle is that they are responsive. They understand that in the architecture and design world, deadlines are everything. If you have an issue and you have a deadline coming up, they'll find a solution. And the third guiding principle is that they are proactive. They'll always make sure that your systems are up to date so unplanned issues won't come up, as well as meet with you regularly to explain new technology advances within the industry. So, as business owners and architects, how often do we think about our IT provider? Typically, only when things go wrong. And for many of us, unfortunately, this happens too often, especially with the latest emphasis on remote work. Arc IT, however, is a very different kind of company. They specialize in serving architecture, design, and engineering firms, and their goal is to help you use technology as a competitive advantage. This means that they understand your technology stack, and they won't waste your time and money learning how your tools work within your process. Combine that with industry-leading response times, proactive remote hardware management, and solid disaster recovery and backup solutions. That's something that everybody should be thinking of, honestly. And enterprise-grade security management. And yet, above all, these are just table stakes for a solid IT company. Arc IT goes a step further. They become your strategic partner when it comes to planning, budgeting, and integrating new technology into your business processes. So all of this sounds expensive, right? Nope. Because Arc IT is highly specialized for our industry, their pricing is on par or in some cases even lower than other IT providers. Arc IT is transparent and even publishes the pricing right on their website. Speaking of their website, there's also something else you should check out when you're there, and that is their Design Under Influence blog and video series. Again, adding value to IT type solutions across industry, all good stuff. So your business deserves a competent, responsive, and proactive IT partner. Reach out to my friends at Arc IT for a free consultation. So go to GetArcIT, that's GetArchit.com, arc like architecture in the middle, and click Work with Us. In this podcast, I talk a lot about all the realities with my guests. You know, mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, all the realities. And I've got a new message for you from my friends at Avail. Let's talk about the new reality, which is that content, as I've talked about in the previous message from them, both wants and needs to live everywhere. Long gone are the days of saving files to your local hard drive or to a single on-premises server. In order to solve remote collaboration, information has moved to the edge. The cloud is king, and the number of cloud services out there dictate that the number of storage locations will continue to grow dramatically. Where do you store your files? BIM 360, OneDrive, SharePoint, Box, Dropbox, AWS, Azure. Chances are you probably save them in some weird combination of those that I just mentioned and more. Well, here's the point of this message. Avail hides the complexity of where content and information resides. What file to use used to be your biggest concern. Now it's where do all those files live. Avail takes where out of the equation, which means that with Avail you can actually find your mission-critical and not-so-critical files too, right when you need them. Avail helps get you the information you need faster. Go to getavail.com today to learn more. Systems and standard operating procedures. You already know that's how to build a profitable business and find the freedom you want. You need systems and procedures. But you struggle with choosing the systems you need most and how to implement those systems quickly so you can get back to doing what you love most. The Designing Your Business Masterclass series was created by an acclaimed architect and business consultant, Douglas Teager, FAIA, to help fellow architects and engineers run their firms more profitably while maintaining a healthy work-life balance. Douglas grew from a solo practitioner to become managing partner of his 30-plus person firm, and then later sold his firm so he can do what he does today, helping architects be more successful at Teager Consulting. On the third Wednesday of every month, Douglas dives deep into an essential topic that will strengthen the profitability of your firm and make it sustainable for growth in the years to come. Register now for the Designing Your Business Masterclass with Douglas Teager at bqe.com/masterclass and start implementing powerful systems for the profitability you need and the freedom you want. Every live masterclass session includes AIA continuing education credit, and when you visit bqe.com/masterclass, you'll have access to the full library of past sessions on demand. The Designing Your Business Masterclass is free and is brought to you by our friends at BQE, the makers of BQE Core, the software that makes it easy to manage your projects and people for maximum productivity and ultimate profitability. Register now for the next Designing Your Business Masterclass at bqe.com/masterclass. That's bqe.com/masterclass. And now let's get back to our conversation. It's interesting to kind of think about the building industry as this big puzzle and what this part of that puzzle is. So maybe you can define what being an owner's rep really is. And I think this is where we start to get into the territory of the gray area of there's so much going on here, right? It's part psychologist, like you've said, it's part Switzerland, like being this neutral facilitator, this neutral territory between various parties in the job. So maybe you can just start off and define owner's rep.
Yeah, it's such an interesting role. And as a contractor, I had worked with a number of different owners reps.
I think also, real quick, also, I think about this as you're describing this, because like, how did this niche come out? Like, where did that come from? And I'm sure there's a void there. And it's like, this is a business opportunity. Maybe Grant saw this, you saw this, but like it's because there is a void also in the process.
Yes. So my understanding of where the owner's representative originated, and I've done research on it. There's not really it's not in the encyclopedia anywhere. Like, this is where the owner's rep started in this country or that country. What my understanding of it is that the owner's rep started as a quantity surveyor or a cost engineer, right? And, was much more in the commercial world and not in the residential world. And, was managing a $50 million, commercial building. And the owner's representative or cost engineer was there to ensure the project stayed on schedule and on budget, and had an immense knowledge of insights from the material, purchasing and actual construction means and methods and ways, and was just constantly on site or looking at the project on behalf of the client from a cost and time perspective. So I think that's kind of where the owner's rep role began. At least that's my understanding of it. And if I'm incorrect, I'm more than happy to learn more around it. This is just where my research has led me. I think what it has evolved to over time is different. There are still owners reps who are succinctly schedule and cost. And, they focus very heavily on that. And that is inevitably something that we focus on as well. A macro budget, a macro schedule, ensuring that the client understands here's really the time that you're going to take, and here is really the investment that you're going to make.
It's like time, it's expectations, and you're basically an interpreter of the built environment, because they can't dive deep because they've got other businesses to run and things to do, and how could they, right? So, and I think a lot of times we in the building industry are so used to talking with our vocabulary, just like any industry is, like they've all got their own, that it's hard to see the forest through the trees because we're so caught up into it. And so this is something as a designer I dealt with all the time, which is how do you communicate effectively so that somebody can truly understand what you're talking about? It could be visual, it could be experiential, but it could also be just completely dropping the jargon and talking to them like they're five without treating them like they're five, right?
That is very astute and very wise. I think, we all get so much into what we're doing. And even I tell my team members now, we send out a weekly update to our clients every week, and it really gives them a snapshot of what's going on with their project. And look, some of our patrons have 3, 4, 5, 6 projects going on at once, right? And we're managing them for 4 or 5 years, right? And you really have to keep the client or the patron or the investor involved and engaged, because if they're not, then they may lose interest. The project stalls, they become frustrated, all of the risk for a project.
And the project team relies on them for decisions, right? So, and if they don't make the decisions, then it gets to that stalling, and like you're talking about.
Precisely. So, we send out the weekly update and we keep them in the mix and really, trying to keep them enjoying the process and putting joy into the process from the owner's perspective is immensely important. But my team members, I talked to them and we're doing a weekly update review just yesterday and, you know, SCO, OCO, da 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 da, all of the jargon, right?
All the
And it's like,
acronyms.
hey,
Yeah.
all of the acronyms. Hey, I understand that we put these in there, but we need to de-acronym. Like, we cannot have so many acronyms in here because it's just not as easy to understand as we need to make it, and taking that extra 2 minutes, right? Just when the client reads their executive summary for us as to what's going on their $30 million project is more digestible for them. So they're therefore enjoying the process more,
Yeah. If it
right?
makes it too hard, they just tune out. Yeah. Don't have time for that.
Yeah, and that, that I've I'm sure you've had it happen too. I bring up the fan analogy or the sports court analogy. You'll be meeting with a client on site with the contractor, the mechanical engineer, the structural engineer, the architect, and the designer. And we're at this massive point in the project where, we really need to figure out how to integrate the mechanical with the structural in this specific room. And it's very complex. And, it's requiring all of the brain trust to really be open to discuss it and to describe what their issues are and to describe what their impediments are. And the client will be sitting there and, you've got the structural engineer and he's saying it to the contractor and they're kind of saying the same thing, but they're not exactly aligned yet. And we're getting so close. And then the client says, well, what about the fan in the primary suite? Did we figure out what the fan is
Yeah.
going?
Squirrel.
And it's like, oh, and it happens all the time, right?
Not right now,
And
client.
well, what it is, what I have come to realize is that when the client does that, it is an opportunity for the entire team because it's a lifeline.
It's insight. Yeah, totally. It's an
I
insightful point.
don't get it. I don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are talking about this and it's way above my head. So I'm grasping for something that I can comprehend. I'm grasping for something that makes sense to me, right? It's probably why our clients have an easier time communicating with interior designers versus architects because the architects are so much more conceptual and the designer is like, this is the fabric we're going to use on the couch. And it's I look at it as, this opportunity for me, especially now, to give the patron to all of us the patience and the time to be curious, to understand how they understand things. And when they ask those kinds of questions, as frustrating as I understand it to be, because we were so close, everyone was so close, and then the curveball is thrown in, and that magic point, right? That we were just about to get to and how to create it, how to take it from concept to creation. We're so close. But now, instead of looking at the owner and their what seems to the entire construction team a silly question, is like, okay, well, let's then I'll start asking more foolish questions, if you will, about the structure, about the HVAC, about how the construction details, what they mean, about how the assemblies go together, what that means for the finish, just go back to being a beginner again, right? And not being afraid to be a beginner in a room full of brilliant minds, you know? And doing that on behalf of a client is such a gift for me because I get to be the beginner in the room and ask silly questions and ask the questions that help them understand.
It helps them not be that person too, because that could totally turn into a train wreck. So I can see the value in that.
Precisely. So that's helping set their expectation. It's helping narrow that gap that we talked about earlier from understanding the concept to creation to the final products, and helping them understand how, because the gap is in between, right? In concept, now we have the tools to show them the concept, especially in 3D rendering, photorealistic renderings, all the software, the tools are now there. But it's that creation moment that they're just not quite comprehending. Like, well, why does it take that long? I don't understand, right? So it's helping them understand and comprehend the complexities of construction in a simple way that doesn't demean them for not understanding.
But the depth is what is so intriguing to me, right? And it's not difficult to get there, but you have this desire to. Okay, so I guess this all goes back to where we started, which was this idea of being this neutrality figure in the room and being able to take on the burden of being the beginner again, so that on the behalf of, right, you're very much like an avatar for the owner in that circumstance, so that they can save face and not be the beginner, even though, I mean, it's obvious that you're doing it for them, but it's really interesting psychology going on in this process, and that to me is what's so fascinating about it all.
For sure. And it's also understanding the psychology of the architect and the designer, and understanding, I was talking to a very talented landscape architect just yesterday, and he's like, I just don't understand. They are hiring me for all of my experience and how I look at things and how I see things. And they're always trying to shoehorn in.
They want to tell me what to do. This is that famous Frank Gehry, holding up the middle finger to the crowd, which was,
yes,
right. Why do you hire me and then want to tell me what to do? Yeah.
Yes.
The ego is big.
It's big. And so it's also reminding the design team, they are your patron, right? And the push and pull in their perspective and your perspective, it may pull more to your polarity than theirs, right? But if you are open and you look at their wanting, instead of to shoehorn, but to share what they're thinking and feeling, and what this design makes them think and feel, just maybe if you look at it as an opportunity instead of something adversarial, then you can take that and make something that's even greater. And as a designer or an architect, you can expand and grow and become more enlightened.
And this is the process of, or the difference between art and architecture, honestly, is the utility of it and the actual use by the real people in the end product. And so designers should not get hired just to provide an art, right, that potentially is inhabitable, right, without any input, because that's the whole point.
Right. That's right. So I think, to me, there's kind of three, in my experience, and the categories may grow, but owners reps kind of fall into three different categories. You have the cost engineer or slash I call them the justifier, right? The justifier is there to justify their existence on the project.
Yes.
I'm going to negotiate this person down. I'm going to take this point off of this guy. I'm going to do this on that. I'm going to say that it needs to be at this cost. Now my fee is basically offset plus some, so I can continue to be here. There's no way the client's going to fire me because I just saved them all this money, and it's even, more than my fee. And that's just, in my opinion, a bad way to approach things, because what that does to the entire team is it makes them not want to work on that project. It makes the frequency of the work that they're putting in place less joyful. It makes the experience that they're having in the work that they do less enlightened.
I've been through that value engineering process so many times during design, and it is a serious morale killer, right?
It is. And value engineering is, there's also, again, it's looking at some of those things as an opportunity. Value engineering, I think, is an opportunity to be creative and inventive, right? And the American spirit lends itself to that very much, right? So value engineering, I think, falls in a slightly different category, but can, if you don't approach it the right way, can truly kill a project morale. And project morale is just immensely important. So the justifier kills project morale, and the project suffers, and the end result suffers. And it may sound a little crazy, but I would go as far as to say the feeling when you're in that space doesn't feel as good.
I absolutely agree. Yep.
So that's one. Then you have the half truth. The half truth owner's rep is like Superman. They get the straight from the contractor, they get the whole story from the architect, they get the whole story from the designer, they get the whole story from the structural engineer. They're very good at understanding all that's going on the project. They only give the contractor half of the story from the architect, and the architect half of the story from the contractor. And magically, in all of these meetings, they are always the only one with a solution.
Yeah. The manipulator. Yep.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
Mm.
And that I would say is also, and they're there, they're the two roles are closely related, right? But they're there instead of just creating a harmonious, flow, if you will, and a true collaborative place to come and work. They're manipulating that feeling. They're manipulating the art form of what we're all here to do. And that is a dangerous thing. And, I was talking to a good friend of mine, a designer yesterday, and she said, we have this big meeting tomorrow. I'm not really looking forward to it. And the owner's rep has to tell the client that we're not going to finish till December, and they're supposed to finish in August. And I said, well, how long has the owner's rep known that this is going to happen? And she says, oh, 3 or 4 months. I said, that's terrible. That's terrible. I was like, I don't want to, I'm not saying I need the work because I'm very busy, but you should tell the owner to fire them, because part of what an owner's rep does is consistently sets realistic expectations with the client. Because as soon as the expectations no longer align with reality, the bigger that gap gets, the more frustrated the client gets, the less joy they bring to the project.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
So that's, and then there's the peak way and the peak ethos. And there are other firms out there that I think do the same thing, but it's really just coming to the table and checking our ego at the door and working as a true collaborator. And sometimes that means understanding what's wrong with the designer or what's going on in their personal life as to how that's affecting their work, and how, we can get them to do what we need them to do for this project and the client, right? Sometimes it's understanding that the superintendent on site, like his son just went to the hospital because he had this, that, or the other, and it's being empathetic and seeking to understand and remaining curious about the entire team, and not falling into the patterns and rhythms that we've all fallen into time and time again, where we go to work and we get frustrated because we're not getting exactly what we need when we need it. And it's being more empathetic to the other stakeholder who's working with us, and knowing that they have their own life experiences and everything that's going on in their life as they approach their work.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that come to mind when you say that. And one is always giving someone the benefit of the doubt, right? First. That's where you start.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And just being able to like you're saying, empathy, right? Have, like, look at your own life. Look at all of the other things that are happening at the same time. Well, yeah, that's absolutely happening to every single person on the planet, also in a very different way. And so just being able to have that perspective and bring that to the table when a problem or some circumstance arises, to be open to the possibility that there's other influences happening, then that's a huge advantage to start from, rather than a judgmental one.
Yes. It prevents defensiveness. And I think what folks don't understand, and sometimes, or they understand but they forget, we all forget, right, is that defense is usually met with defense. And an openness and a yearning and a curiosity is often met with the counter, right? So really approaching a project and a team from look, the money and the time and the schedule and the deliverables and the weekly updates and accounting for everything that's going on and making sure that the process is in place and the change orders are signed by the client and the client understands why the change order needed to be signed and why the contractor or why the architect is not wrong in doing this and why they're not trying to get you. It's just like those are all parts of it, and those we do very well. And I would say the best in the industry, the processes that we have in place, make sure that those things are done well. But I think what really is important in a good owner's rep, what we look for at peak when we hire someone, we only hire like 10 to 15% of people that we recruit. We're really looking for someone who is just well-rounded in construction and is a genius in their right in construction and understands the nuances of the built environment, but also can be open and can kind of in a way seek enlightenment in this experience and not start to close down and not start to get stuck in patterns, but be sensitive and empathetic to the additional collaborators and working on behalf of the other collaborators, not just the client, but on behalf of the collaborators to ensure that the work that they're bringing to the table is the most joyous work and that they are putting the most joy into their work. And inevitably, every project, you can't have a perfect team every time. And there will be the challenges for each project that we will constantly work with. And I think, it's always about working with, because these clients that we're servicing are very busy, very wealthy, very guarded, very specific. And sometimes we'll get an advisor for the client who is the uncle or the cousin or whomever it is. And you see the design team kind of glaze over and roll their eyes when they ask a question. And, I think that's just foolish for a number of reasons because, we had talked about it before, Evan. My goal is always to become the most trusted advisor with a client. And sometimes you're getting an advisor to the client who doesn't necessarily understand our world. But guess what? That client, that patron, they really trust them. They respect their opinion. They want to hear their opinion. So instead of pushing away that advisor, it's working with them. It's looking at them as an opportunity to learn, to grow. Maybe they are a crazy person and they know nothing and they're just causing all kinds of friction and challenge. But even in that, there's a lesson to learn. Even in understanding that they're supposed to be at the table and we shouldn't push them out. We should work to include them. We should work to make this a truly collaborative environment that's healthy and safe for people to come with foolish questions.
Yeah, that's where learning happens. You were talking earlier about this idea of the owner's rep as basically as an advocate, and you said it a minute ago, and my gears were kind of turning on this before you were saying it, and you totally confirmed it, and I think it bears repeating. You're not just an advocate for the owner, you're an advocate for everybody on the team to do their best work, right? And that is really an interesting point of view, and I think that really does lead to this battle for the title of trusted advisor, which I see from lots of different angles. We see a lot of architects who want to be their client's trusted advisor. There's a lot of thought leadership out there on that topic. I see it from building product manufacturers in my line of work, right? They want to be the trusted advisor for the design team when it comes to their products and their assemblies and things like that. But when it ultimately kind of comes to all these pieces working together in harmony, because they're all valuable pieces of the puzzle to deliver the actual project for the client, which includes the owner into this whole process, that's the glue that you're talking about, being the quote unquote owner's rep, the quote unquote Switzerland neutral facilitator sitting in the middle of all of this and interpreting it for different people because they have different vocabularies. And you have the understanding of the construction side and the design side and the owner's side. I mean, that really does kind of all fit together neatly into this idea of trusted advisor.
Yeah. And I think I never want to be in a position or on a team where the architect is not also a trusted advisor and where the builder is not also a trusted advisor. Because good teams, right, in corporations, in sports, in whatever, venue or avenue, good teams have lots of good collaborators coming to the table and playing to each other's strengths and weaknesses, right? Understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the team and then playing to those and being okay and admitting that you have these weaknesses, right? So I never want when a client starts to question things to a point and the trust is degraded with a contractor, designer, architect, or consultant, it is very dangerous for a project because once trust starts to erode, you have to stop it immediately and you have to nip it and you have to be direct about it. I have very awkward conversations with clients and consultants, but because I hear from a client, I'm just not sure I trust them on this. It's like, wait a second. Red flag. We can't let this cancer grow. We have to have an awkward conversation, but the awkward conversation is going to save a lot of heartache later. So I never want a client to look at me as the only trusted advisor. I want them to look at me as the most trusted advisor because I can intake and synthesize what all of their other advisors are thinking and give them a good synopsis and give them a good understanding, right?
That's huge. That's huge. And that builds trust also between everybody. If you're really there trying to work on the behalf of keeping things moving in the right direction, not allowing these things to build up inside so that they can explode to the outside at some later point because they've just boiled over. That's huge.
No,
That's a huge.
it's bad. That's bad for everybody, and I always, describe to teams, right? Like, hey, listen, this patron has hired a, 30-piece orchestra and you're all instruments. And they have bestowed upon me the responsibility of being the conductor. And I am grateful for this opportunity. I am, hoping that I can give you all very good direction and insight and work well with all of you. I am infallible. I will make mistakes. We all will. It's okay. We have our internal processes that we know work. Let's stick to those. Let's keep our best practices in place. The horse trading that goes on behind the scenes, for me, I don't need a client to understand that this designer is fighting to get this skylight and this stairwell, and the architect is like, well, I think that the extra window in the primary suite is more important, right? I don't need a client to sit in on that kind of argument / conversation. You know, I just need them to understand, like, there's a push here and there's a pull here. What's more important to you, right? They're both making very valid points, but I just always convey to the design teams in specific, and you get a lot of, or you can get friction between an interior design firm and an architect. And, you know, I have one client specific, and I just kind of told them, I was like, look, that you guys are in North America and you're in London, so I don't want the client ever hearing like, well, I don't have this from them, so I can't do it,
Mm.
or this isn't done yet, so I can't get it finished. I was like, we can have that internal dialogue, and I will help keep your design partners in this. I will hold them to account, and I'm always firm and fair. You know, hey Evan, I know that you've got this deliverable that's done. You said early next week. What does that mean? Is that end of day Monday? Is that end of day Tuesday? Or does that mean Wednesday morning? What's most realistic for you? Right? Help me understand what's realistic for you. So I can set that expectation with our patron and keep them enjoying the process and keep everybody playing well together.
You don't want to. You want to avoid the finger pointing because that's just
That's
it's nasty.
it's bad for everybody. It's bad for everybody, you know. And the end goal is to have a project that ends well and is beautiful, and God willing, a client who wants to bring the same team on to do something else again.
Yeah.
And finger pointing kills that.
I have a silly question for you. You use the word patron, and I'm wondering why you've chosen to use that word instead of customer or client or anything else.
Well, I am a steward to my patrons' money.
Hmm. It does have kind of a fiduciary aspect to the word. Yeah.
And I look at, you know, customer, client, this is way bigger than that. You know, I am fortunate enough to work on pieces of art with teams of artists, artisans, craftsmen, designers, architects, you know, 200 and 300 or 400 people deep, right? These projects are one of a kind, very difficult, intricate projects. And at the end of the day, the word that I think most describes the owner that I am representing is a patron. And they are a patron to our art form. And, you know, while I may not be the artist in putting the stone in place or the artist in drawing how the stone goes in place, my art form is facilitating and communicating and making sure that we're all just working harmoniously together for our patron.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I love that. I love that you have thought about that and that's intentional.
It was a hard thing. That was one of the hardest things for me, moving from being the builder to being the owner's rep. You know, is something that I really reflected on long and hard. I was nervous about, you know, when you're the builder, you really understand and know, and you get to take a lot of credit because you're doing a lot of the work, right? And now I get to take less credit in a way, but the credit I get is that when a project that I'm on runs well, it almost seems like I'm doing nothing at all. And in fact, we've had clients that we've set up a project team and we've been so open and transparent with them. And we share all of our deliverables and the forms and the ways and the means in which we do it, that some folks are like, I got this. I can do what you guys are doing. I got it. You know, thank you so much. And sometimes they call us back up later. Sometimes they, you know, they go through the project and finish and are successful. That's a win for us, right? Sometimes we protect a patron in the sense of, I want to buy this piece of property. I want to build this house. Someone told me, my friend told me that they built their house for $1,200 a square foot or $1,400 a square foot, whatever it is. And I want to do it with this architect and this landscape architect and this designer. Okay, well, that designer is like $2,000 a square foot, and you haven't included any of your soft costs or your FF&E or any of your landscaping costs. So the $10 million house that you were just thinking about building, it's more like $17 million when we're all said and done out the door. And we've killed projects, you know, where a client is like, that's
Which is also
too big.
valuable.
which is a win for us,
Right.
which is a win for us. You
Right.
know, it's,
You have the wrong expectations. It's going to go that way all the way through, and it's going to be bad.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a gift that we get to come and work on the projects we do with the teams that we do, and I'm just immensely grateful. And I do use the word patron because I feel like they're patronizing me. They're giving me this gift to work on things that are just immense opportunities to learn and grow and create something where there was nothing.
Well, I really appreciate the insight into this, and I definitely have a new appreciation for this piece of the puzzle that obviously it's not utilized on every project across the board, but this is definitely one of those things where when you know it exists, now you can ask for it. You can be an advocate for this kind of facilitative process so that you have a team player of many teams that is working toward the success of a project.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Keith, where can people find out more about what you guys are doing at Peak Projects? Where can they follow you guys online, get in touch with you, anything that you want to put out there to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, peakprojects.com is a great place to start. Most of our clients do retain us under a non-disclosure agreement, so we can't really per se chat about specific clients or specific projects. But there is information on the site about our team and the background and the history of Peak Projects. And I think we've also got a LinkedIn page, so you can check us out there. And any of your listeners are free to email me. It's just Keith@peakprojects.com if you ever just want to talk. We're happy to help. A lot of times we'll get a call from an architect and they're like, "Hey, I've got this issue with this client. What do you think?" And it's a 10 or 15 minute, "Oh, that's interesting. Here's how I would approach that." Right? So we're just open to help. And if you want to do it more the traditional way, just hop on the website and send us an email, and we're happy to help out with any project or question, or just have an intelligent conversation with a like-minded collaborator.
Awesome. Well, I'll include links to all those in the show notes for this episode. And Keith, thanks for taking the time to have this conversation today. I think it's very valuable. And so I appreciate the work that you are doing and the lane that you've chosen to, I guess, go down and be a part of this industry. It's really intriguing.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. It's really been a pleasure. Super appreciate your time and your perspectives as well.
Thanks for listening to the Troxel Podcast. And once again, I would like to thank Arc IT for sponsoring this episode. Visit their website at GetArcIT, that's GetArchit.com. Thank you to Avail for their support of this podcast episode. Visit getavail.com to see their holistic approach to content management today. Thank you to BQE, the makers of BQE Core, for their support of this podcast episode. Visit bqe.com/masterclass to register for the next Designing Your Business Masterclass. This show is part of the Gable Media Podcast Network. You can see all the shows at gablemedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what I'm doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and of course, share it with your friends. I'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at trxl.co/podcast, where you can find every episode. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. Just search for eTroxel. Talk to you soon.